Hello again, everyone. This is Tom O'Connor, the director of the Gulf Coast Legal Technology Center in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I am here with Rachi Messing. Once again, Rachi is the senior program manager at the Microsoft Legal Department. Rachi, how are you?
I'm great.
Good. Great. Today we're going to talk about litigation holds. As always, quickly, I'll mention that we're doing a series of videos here at the request of Judge Xavier Rodriguez of the federal court in San Antonio, Texas, for a course that he is teaching at the St. Mary's School of Law, also in San Antonio. And as sort of the basis or backbone for our discussions, we're working our way through the flow chart of the EDRM, the Electronic Discovery Reference Model. We had started with information governance, and now we're going to be talking about litigation holds, which kind of moves into that preservation area there. The info governance and identification kind of flowed into each other, and we're going to kind of segue from identification into preservation for the litigation holds. The EDRM, as I've mentioned before, was originally started by George Socha and Tom Geldman, and now is being run by the Duke University School of Law. And this chart, although it is a linear chart, is not meant to be a progressive chart from left to right. This is just a means of identifying various steps in the workflow for discussion purposes. The workflow itself is often iterative and or repetitive, not only from beginning to end, but throughout the workflow itself. And certain steps may revert back to earlier steps and start all over again. Litigation hold may be one of those, and we'll talk about that in a second. So, but first, what do we mean by litigation holds? I just want to do a quick little intro here. Litigation holds oftentimes have a little bit of confusion around them because of the existence, of course, of preservation hold letters, which go up. But it's important to note that the litigation hold is simply one way of meeting your earlier preservation obligation. Your obligation to preserve documents is not necessarily stated anywhere in a specific statute or regulation, or even specifically in the federal rules of civil procedure if you're dealing with a federal activity. It can be, in fact, triggered before there's litigation, or even before a litigation hold letter is sent out. There's a number of ways that can happen. It can occur as a duty, as it often does under the common law, and that in itself can be a confusing phrase. If you, like I do, happen to have been a native of one of the New England states, the common law refers to some hearkening back to the earliest days of English common law, which are the basis for much of the statutory underpinnings in the states up in the Northeast. That's not necessarily the case throughout the country, and common law in this regard often refers, or more commonly refers to, case law that has developed that gives an obligation to preserve documents, to preserve evidence that precedes electronic discovery, and really goes back to preserving evidence that may be relevant or crucial to any particular piece of litigation. The Zubilite decisions, I think, were a big case, or case is decisions actually in an e-discovery dispute by Judge Shinlin in the Southern District of New York. That's first started really setting that out in a way that has been the basis for much later decisions. I think there's a good one in the Enton versus Chrysler case. That's in Northern California, District of Northern California case from 2016. There's also a great white paper commentary on litigation holds from the Sedona Conference, which I refer people to, and a couple of good quotes here I'm just going to read to you briefly. One is from an article by Craig Ball on what he called the perfect preservation letter that's on his website. And he says, in fact, the duty to preserve can arise long before any litigation. A party's obligation to preserve evidence is generally held to arise when the party knows or has reason to know that evidence may be relevant to future litigation. This reasonable anticipation of litigation standard means that any person or company who sees a claim or lawsuit on the horizon must act even before a preservation letter may arrive or a lawsuit has been filed to cease activities which are likely to destroy electronic or tangible evidence and take affirmative steps to preserve such evidence. Our old friend, the late Browning Marion, said in a presentation he did once that when litigation is reasonably anticipated, you must issue a litigation hold and reissue it periodically. It is not a one-stop event. It's not a one and done. And that hold should, one, suspend the company's routine document retention and destruction policy in order to, two, ensure that relevant information, is not accidentally erased or overwritten. So, Rocky, with that grand introduction, why don't you talk to us, if you will, about exactly how Office 365 can do that, can hold or preserve documents in a manner that makes sure that they're not going to be deleted and are moved aside outside of the normal course of any normal retention and or deletion policies.
Yeah, sounds good. So usually, as you said, Tom, the duty to preserve and to start the process can be long before litigation takes place, before the actual litigation starts. And usually the first step in Office 365, when a investigation or a litigation matter, or whatever it might be, starts to take place, you'll go ahead and start by creating the actual case. So here, let's go ahead and create the Tom potential fraud case. And we're going to go ahead in here and go ahead and save the case. So at this point in time, the case is in the back end is actually going ahead. It's being created. And you can see that we've got a whole bunch of different tabs of possibilities, which over the next few sessions, we're going to make sure that we're going to go through all of these and discuss what each of them do.
Right.
But for today, we're going to focus on these first three, where the holds is the actual hold policies that are going to be put in place. The communications have to do with that, as you said, the terminology of hold. A lot of people will use that for both the process of the hold notifications as well as the actual preservation of the physical data. And we're going to actually start here with the custodians, because the way that Office 365 works is it allows you to start by just simply saying who are the parties that you believe are involved in this litigation or in this investigation. And by doing so, it's actually going to do a whole bunch of things, including processing, all kinds of things on that data, which we'll get into at a later time. But we're going to focus now on that preservation side. So we're going to start off by searching for some users who we believe might potentially have data that is relevant to whatever this investigation of fraud is going to be looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add 3 users. And from a system standpoint, what it's doing is it's hooked in to what's called the Active Directory of the company. So all of the end users who exist within this corporation, I can just start typing their names and they will show up here that I can add them as a custodian.
Right.
Now, when I go through here, the first question it's going to ask is, what of their data do you want to make sure is going to be included in this preservation? Now, we know that I can have email, exchange email, and each individual user can have a OneDrive, meaning a personal space where they can go ahead and put files. So I'm going to say, yep, I want all of those to be included here. But additionally, I can come in here and I can say, for example, I want to see if this user was involved in any teams. Well, in this case, no, they weren't. I can go in and say, were they involved in any SharePoint sites? Look at that, they're a member of this team site. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, I want this team site to be included in that hold. Now, I don't have to, and a lot of times, especially in large corporate environments, a single user might be a member of 20, 30, 50 different sites. They might be a member of lots and lots of different teams, and not all of them are going to be relevant to this specific investigation. So this identification piece, so again, tying into the EDRM model, helps me to identify which sites they belong to, that they have permissions to, but not necessarily the ones that I actually need to preserve. And this gets back to the attorney's job of actually performing custodian interviews, making sure that you understand what the scope and what data is actually going to be needed for this specific case, for this specific litigation.
Right.
So I can come in here, I can select whatever data I want. I also could have, if I wanted to, I could have manually put in, for example, let's say they are a member of a specific, they identify a specific SharePoint site that they're not a member of, but that they know has data. I could have come in here and just typed in that name, and it would have brought up whatever that site is, even though they're not actually a member of it. So I've got the ability to go out and get a little bit beyond just their specific data. And then the last step is hold. Do I want to actually place this data on hold to preserve it, to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere? And in this case, I'm going to say yes. And let's very quickly take a little look at what does that mean in the Office 365 environment. So this is a diagram of a user's mailbox, where the top part are all of the things that the end users, you know, Tom, you're used to seeing your inbox, and you might have created a bunch of folders, your sent items, right. You might have your you know, project folders, whatever it might be. So this top area of the mailbox are all of the folders that are viewable and visible to an end user. The bottom part is also part of the end user's mailbox, but they don't see it. And what happens is, as mail goes through its life cycle of getting delivered and then going ahead and going through the process of either being edited or deleted, any data that is, if this mailbox is on hold, any data that is on hold, when it's deleted or when it's edited, the original version of that message will go ahead and be kept within this bottom part of the mailbox, which again is not viewable to the end user. But most importantly, everything in the entire mailbox is viewable to e-discovery searches.
Gotcha.
So when I preserve that data, what I'm saying is I want to make sure that even if the end user deletes it, and even if they go in and they, you know, they go into their recycling bin and they empty it and they do whatever they can to try to purge it out of their mailbox, out of their life, right, in order to hide evidence, or maybe it's just the normal course of business where they're deleting stuff. Even though they did that, if this data is on hold, it's going to still exist within the bottom part of the mailbox. And therefore, it gets indexed and it's searchable at a later time.
Great.
The same thing applies on the SharePoint or the OneDrive side, where I might have, you know, all kinds of different things on the top here of things that are viewable to the end user. But if they delete it, if they edit it, then what happens is any data that's on hold will automatically be kept in the preservation hold library, which is a hidden part of the site, which the end user doesn't see, but again, is viewable and is searchable by eDiscovery.
Right. And
So,
just to be clear, Rocky, and remind people, you're mentioning SharePoint and OneDrive. This is a web-based system. We are talking about Office 365, which is a product that's based in the cloud, and we're assuming that documents are being stored in one of those sites.
That is correct. Or that the data is at least being synced from their local machine, from their laptop or desktop, and is being synced up into the cloud so that it's being backed up there.
Exactly. Great point.
Okay, so we've established that we've got some custodians. We've gone ahead and put their data on hold. Now what we're going to do is we are going to actually let them know, because in this case, we do have that, we do want to let them know and give them a notice that their data is on hold. So this is going to be the hold notice. It's going to come from the administrator. And I can go ahead here, and you can see I've got some buttons here where I can automatically put in, please note that you are on hold. And give them a link to go ahead and acknowledge that notice. Here I can define who am I actually going to, how am I going to send it? So this is the fraud legal hold notice that they'll get an email about. I can go ahead and again use any of these links to say, okay, I'm issuing it. You mentioned about reissue. So if I need to go ahead and reissue the notice at a later point, I can go ahead and set that up. And when the case is over, then I'm going to want to go ahead and release it. So and it would help if I knew how to spell. So I've gone ahead and I've created that. You also mentioned that I might need to remind people, right? It's not a one and done, right? I might need that after 30 days, if they haven't replied, then I want to go ahead and, or sorry, 10 days, I want to go ahead and say yes to the notice, please, right?
Yep.
And one other option is that, let's say they don't say yes. Well, I can set up here that if they don't say yes after 10 days, automatically escalate it up to their manager based off of whatever's in Active Directory from a HR reporting standpoint to say, yes, you know, your employee has not acknowledged this hold, and we're worried that they're not actually preserving the data that they need to preserve.
Right.
So here I'm going to go ahead and choose from the custodians that I already set up. Who do I actually want to notify? I get a summary of what I did, and I will go ahead and send out that notice. Now, in their mailbox, they will get a notice. If they acknowledge it, then when I come in here, I can very quickly see who's acknowledged it and what their status is, so I can do a manual follow-up or talk to their manager or whatever I might need to do there.
Right.
The last piece is we're actually going to go in and we can see that what happened when I set up the hold, when I said at the end of the process of setting up the custodians, you can see here that it actually set up this hold. It applied it to the 3 mailboxes and sites that I said, and you can see here it gives me a quick report on how much data am I actually preserving for this hold. If I need to, I can even come in here and I can say, you know what, I realized that I've got one other mailbox that I want to put on hold, even though I don't want to add them as a custodian, meaning I don't want to actually notify them or have their data indexed or anything else, but I do want their mailbox to be preserved because I have a whatever other reason. So I can go in here and edit that hold and preserve one more mailbox or another site or whatever it might be, and then update my statistics. And after a minute or two, it'll show me how much additional data is now being preserved for those users. So the process of preserving that data in the cloud, really easy. It lets me make sure, guarantee that that data is going to be preserved for this case. And when we get to the next steps of what do I actually now need to do with that data, I know that it's actually going to be there for me.
Gotcha. And Rob, can we generate a report about all of this?
So there is some reporting available. And one of the things, we talked in the intro to these modules that Office 365 is constantly being developed and worked on. These, we had mentioned, some of these tools are brand new. They're right now in preview as we are talking about this. By the time that this is viewed in class, then those products will already be released with the reporting. The reporting in the interface has not yet been released, so I can't show that, but there is reporting around the case, who's on hold, as well as on a tenant level that I can do some reporting to see across my entire organization what cases have holds in place and what data is being held for the different cases.
And perhaps what we can do is once that is at the release stage, we could do a quick follow-up video here to show some of that.
Absolutely, we can do just some of the new improvements as they're coming along, because really every few months, there's new stuff, there's new improvements, and it's progressing pretty quickly.
Good deal. Great. I'm sorry I interrupted your.
No, that's it.
Well, that's it. All right. Well, I've got to say I really like the flexibility, the fact that you address the issue of being a one and done with iterative reminders and notices back if somebody doesn't respond, because that is a huge problem, especially the bigger the organization. Tracking all of this it can be a problem, but the flexibility of having this built right in, and I also like that the front end that you just as you said, you put in the name and it's showing you where they have data.
Exactly, which from a privacy standpoint, and especially with GDPR and some of the other, European, the Indian rules, the just some of the other countries that really need to make sure that you're conscious of where data is.
Yes.
And this helps to identify them within your Active Directory and where they are and what they're doing.
Right. Right. And also from the point of view of the administrator, you're not reliant on saying to the custodians, where do you have data? You're able to go in and get that. I'm using the phrase very loosely here, but a data map, if you will, a pointer to where all that data is, so that you then can decide, what do we need to hold, what do we not. I think that's a great tool.
That doesn't mean that in your hold notice you shouldn't tell them, find them.
Oh, no.
And from even us at Microsoft internally, my team, we have to make sure that users are notified appropriately, because even though the vast majority of their data is in Office 365 and is in the cloud, people still have notebooks, they still have file desk drawers and all of that type of data, as well as stuff on their local machine, that there is still an obligation to preserve it. So
I am, a great example of that. I will often have documents that I'm working on, and I may in fact print them out and have handwritten notes on them that I, stick in a folder, because they're more thoughts and working notes than they are revisions or part of any track change policy, if you will. And then at some point, as the project progresses and I get more embedded in my electronic version, I still save all those and stick them in a file folder. And I can look to the left on my desk here. I have a nice little collection of file folders of different projects I'm working on with handwritten notes. So you're exactly right. There are secondary types of documents that you need to make sure that you're conveying to the individuals, that we need to preserve all of those. So that's a great point. It's a great tool because it's built into the system, and you're able to go list those users, select those users. That you don't even have to list them. You pull up the list of users and select the ones you want to go after, and then add to them later if you have to. It's a very flexible way of doing this, and gives you that record so that it clearly establishes what you've done. Very much.
From a standpoint, that's really important. Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, Rachi, thank you so much for the time, and I look forward to talking to you again on our next module.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.